Hello, and welcome back to a long overdue episode of the State of the Fandom, our daily or sometimes weekly or sometimes monthly podcast. I am your host, Dr. Neil Fox, not a real doctor, and I am here, as always, with my lovely partner in life and partner in completely legal crime.
Yes. Hello, people. This is Legal Labrador, and again, sorry for the weird hiatus.
We've been dealing with a lot. You'll see it in the documentary, but we have had one of the most strange and absurd and terrifying weeks of our lives. So we will be talking about it for many future podcasts to come, I'm sure.
Yes.
But what I wanted to discuss with you in this episode is something that I've been thinking about for quite a while. So this is something that I am curious if the scientific research backs this up, because this is mostly a thought experiment and not based on research that I've read, because it's quite complicated, and I am not an expert as much as I would like to be. I am not an expert in psychology, but here's what I'm thinking. So how much do you know about the split brain experiments?
Not much.
Okay, well, let's go over them just real quick. So, do you know what, I assume you know what epilepsy is?
Vaguely.
It's basically a electronic storm in the brain. You can think of it as like a lightning storm within the brain, and obviously, since in a lightning storm the firing is relatively random, you can imagine that people experiencing this have a lot of issues with their brain and their body. In many cases, people have what's called an epileptic seizure, where they basically their muscles are firing essentially in random directions. And so a person having an epileptic seizure could be, laying on the ground and writhing, basically. I'm sure you've seen this, hopefully not in person because it's quite dangerous, but I assume you've seen it in movies and such.
I have.
Okay, good. So, there was a treatment for epileptic seizures in the mid-20th century. And this is almost never done today because there are many other more effective treatments now. But for someone who would have what's called grand mal seizures, and when I say grand mal, we're not thinking Darth Maul, even though it kind of sounds the same. Perhaps he should have had one of these procedures done to him. But
Darth Maul wasn't epileptic.
It's a joke. So, for someone who has what's called grand mal seizures, which means seizures all over the brain all at the same time. It's the most dangerous type of seizure you can have, from what I understand, because you basically have no control over your body whatsoever. And so someone having a seizure like this is in a very dangerous position because, let's say that they are driving a car or walking down a flight of stairs or carrying a heavy box, something like that. They can have one of these seizures and they can fall and hurt themselves and potentially many people around them as well if they're driving a car or something like that. So for those who suffer from this issue, doctors and patients and etc. will do almost anything to rid themselves of it, because you're talking about a disease that can easily kill you, and not only that, but has a strong likelihood of, in the process, killing someone else as well. So you can assume that they would go to almost any length to get rid of this issue. And so doctors in I think it was the 60s, I don't remember exactly, but these doctors realized that what is a grand mal seizure? Well, a grand mal seizure is a seizure that starts in one part of the brain and then spreads to the other parts of the brain. And so they reasoned, well, if we can separate the two halves of the brain safely, then what we can do is we can prevent the seizure from spreading to both sides of the brain. So it would be contained on one half of the brain so that the person, let's say they're walking down a flight of stairs, maybe they can, grab the handle or grab the railing, for example, with the half of the brain that's still functioning properly. So anyway, that's the reasoning behind why they decided to try this really invasive procedure.
Basically just a lobotomy.
No, it is not. And the reason why is because the brain is a very strange and very special type of computer. A lot of what the brain does is duplicated many times. So, something important to the brain, like walking, it is controlled by specific areas of the brain, sure, but if one little small area of the brain is having an issue, then sometimes it can be duplicated across different areas, especially in children. A child who has damage to their vision center of their brain, for example, a child can actually recover the vast majority of their vision by a different area of the brain taking over and copying that functionality that it would need. Now, you couldn't do this in a traditional computer. A traditional computer, one program operates one thing. Whereas in the brain, it's much different. People think of the brain as a computer, but it is actually much more like a network of highways or a network of electrical cables, for example, like we've talked about before. The brain as computer analogy is helpful to understand computers and understand brains on a very basic level, but like most things in psychology, it's complicated. It breaks down after you go too far into it. Anyway, so this procedure they came up with because you had some patients who were having seizures like every minute or every 5 minutes. And you can imagine that if someone is having a seizure every 5 minutes, they are not going to live very long. They can't sleep properly. They can't eat properly. It's hard to even drink water when you're having a seizure. Most people can't drink water while they're having a seizure. And so, there are a lot of ethical guidelines for these types of experiments nowadays because of very terrible outcomes like the Tuskegee experiment, for example. But back in those days, there were not nearly as many protections for people's civil rights. And so these people that, the doctors, with some level of rationality, they reasoned, well, this person is going to die in a couple of weeks anyway, so if we do this procedure and it doesn't work, well, they haven't really lost anything. Like I said, not exactly the standard of medical practice that we have today.
Not exactly, no.
But anyway, let me be clear, because just from the simple description, it does kind of sound like a lobotomy. It's, we're cutting part of the brain. But the thing is, with a lobotomy, you are specifically, intentionally messing up part of the brain. So a lobotomy is a very cruel procedure which was performed quite often around the same time, unfortunately, and for the same reason, that they said, well, if this person can't function in society or is so violent that they're trying to hurt themselves and others at every opportunity, then why don't we just mess up their brain? And by messing up their brain, then maybe they can rejoin society. And interestingly enough, this actually led to what people say today is by far the most unfortunate Nobel Prize that's ever been given. The doctor who created the lobotomy won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery.
Sounds about right.
Yes, thank you, Nobel Committee. You have such good taste in Obamas and lobotomies. Very similar subjects, in fact. Just kidding. Obama is not lobotomized yet. No, I'm just kidding.
No, he's not lobotomized. He's
just kidding. I'm just kidding.
He's just a Nobel Peace Prize laureate that has a body count.
Jesus. Yeah, well, you gotta kill a few people to keep freedom, according to some people. It's so stupid. But anyway, so let me get back to this so that our more ADHD listeners like yourself don't click off the podcast before we get to it. So, these doctors tried this very experimental, very controversial as well procedure because, you're going to have people that die from this. I mean, you're talking about a surgery that literally is cutting your brain in half. So, the reason why it's not like a lobotomy, at least not exactly like, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, unfortunately, but the reason why it's not exactly like a lobotomy is because they are only cutting one specific region of the brain. And they are not destroying neurons other than in this specific location. So, what part of the brain connects the two halves? It's called the corpus callosum. That's just the scientific term for it. The corpus callosum has pretty much only one purpose, and the purpose is just to transmit signals from one side of the brain to the other. There, as far as I know, and of course there's always exceptions in psychology, but as far as I know, there is no processing that happens in the corpus callosum. It's like like one of those. It's actually quite similar to one of those wide cables that you connect like RAM to a motherboard, or you connect a power supply to a computer. Ironically enough, because it is literally, and I'm gonna make a little illustration.
Humans are just protogens. Got it.
It sounds crazy, but it's true in many cases. So you have what amounts to a strip or a flat. I'm showing them with a little piece of paper towel.
It's a ribbon cable.
Yeah, a ribbon cable. Thank you. You know what it's called.
Yeah.
I didn't remember it off the top of my head. It's essentially a ribbon cable that goes through the middle of the brain. And so the two halves of the brain are separated by this very thick bundle of neurons, but actually a relatively small bundle of neurons. So if you take a look at this for a moment, you can see that you can pretty easily snip through the middle of it.
Wow.
And that actually separates the two halves of the brain. Now, they didn't know. Before they did this experiment, they had no idea what would happen because this had literally never been done before. Now, the only way that they had some ideas of what might happen is from patients who were born with either none of this brain material or only a small amount of it. Because, weird aberrations like that happen sometimes. But what actually happened was stranger and more intriguing than they could have ever imagined. And this is time for a commercial break. Welcome back from the commercial break. We were just talking about what happens when you snip the brain in half. Snip, snip. It's like a mastectomy. No, what is it called when you can't vasectomy. Sorry, mastectomy is removing of breasts. I meant to say vasectomy, i.e., making it so that the sperm do not reach the end of the penis. Anyway, so here we will. Oh my, that is a cute rabbit. Wow. Wow. So here's what we're gonna do to help the viewers imagine this story. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you are one of these patients, okay? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you are not one of the patients that had it forced upon them against their will. Thank God. In this example, you are one of the patients that chose to do it. Now, why would you, specifically, you, Link Labrador,
yeah,
why would you get this procedure done? Or would you? Maybe you wouldn't. If you were having severe seizures every couple of minutes and like falling on the floor, hurting yourself, having to live in the hospital 24/7 just to stay alive, like live in a hospital room. You can imagine how terrible this would be. So what if you had the option and the doctor came to you in 1967 or whatever and said, "We have this new procedure that can split your brain in half and remove all of the seizures from your mind. Would you take the deal, sonny boy?" I got really into character there for a second.
Maybe. I mean...
But you tell me. I'm curious what your genuine reaction is, or what your genuine reaction would be in that scenario.
Under those circumstances, I'd probably say, yeah, let's give it a shot. What do I have to lose?
Exactly. Well, because even with procedures today as well, one of the things that doctors take into account is quality of life.
Yeah.
So this person, in this example, it's poor Sir Labrador having seizures all the time.
Wow.
What a horrible thing that would be. But a doctor might look at that case and say, well, this person might live another 60 years, but what kind of quality of life will they have if they're having seizures every 5 minutes and can't sleep, can hardly eat? These are the types of things that doctors have to take into account. So, we're going to assume, for the sake of argument, that you, Link Labrador, are the one who is undergoing the procedure, and we were going to just describe what it would feel like subjectively, okay? So this is what it would feel like, all right? You would, if you even had the ability to, depending on how severe the condition was, but you would speak about it with the doctor, and they would bring you into the operating room. And you can imagine this is, the 1960s. So we're not talking about a modern, beautiful, bright operating room. We're talking about everything is green. The lighting is probably pretty bad, except for right over the table. There's probably like giant, knives and things that we would today consider to look like, things that belong in a butcher shop. But that was oftentimes just what hospitals looked like back then. And so this would probably be pretty scary, especially for a child. But you go into this procedure, and they put you under, and you fall asleep. Now, while you are asleep, the doctor goes in and splits the corpus callosum in half. So now your brain has 2 halves to it, okay? Now, when you wake up, the brain is now observing itself after being cut in half. What a curious thing. The brain obviously would have no evolutionary reason to evolve a process by which it could examine itself after being cut in half. So to you, nothing feels different. Okay?
Okay.
So obviously you're going to have a pretty bad headache for a couple of weeks while it heals up, but that's just any surgery, you're going to have that. But in terms of your thinking mind, in terms of your mind being able to focus on different things, being able to speak even, there's no difference. There's no difference whatsoever. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so the scientists are really curious about this because they assumed that the patients would have a lot more trouble with tasks like speaking, for example. A scientist would probably have assumed, if not given any data, before these experiments, they would have assumed something like, oh well, the act of speech is so complex and so difficult that, of course, human beings must have many places in their brain that process speech. It can't just be one half of the brain. But they would have been very wrong. So, despite the fact that nothing feels different to you subjectively, the scientists start to notice some very odd things. So, One, this was a pretty obvious one. I'm sure you could just guess this just thinking about it, but obviously it took some time for them to learn how to maneuver their body again, because you're like in the Bible's verse, the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. You can't, decide to pick up an apple and decide to pick up a paring knife. You now don't have the communication. So, for example, if you're trying to cut something in half, the only way that your two halves of the brain can communicate with each other is through vision. And so that is how the patients would coordinate their movements primarily, is that one half of the brain would see, oh, I'm picking up a wet glass from the dishwasher. Okay, now I need to pick up a towel and clean it out. But to the patient, nothing feels different. It feels exactly the same way that they did things before, but maybe they're just a little bit more clumsy than they were before. But for most patients, it wasn't that big of a deal. So, the scientists decide to start experimenting on what happens when only one visual field is visible to that half of the brain. So, the left hand is controlled by the right brain. The right hand is controlled by the left brain. And that's true for all the different parts of your body. So, your left eye goes to your right visual cortex. Your right eye goes to your left visual cortex. The assumption is that this has to do with protecting the body against paralysis. Like if you get damage on one side of your body, the other one still works, but no one is exactly sure. That's the assumption, but it is not for sure that that's why it happens. Anyway, so they start doing these experiments, and they find this is probably why a lot of they find all these interesting things that illustrate things that they were trying to figure out answers for in the past, but they just didn't have any data to go off of. So, for example, let's say they use an eye patch and they cover up one eye. Now only this eye can see. So with the right eye, the left brain is now able to see, and you can do things with your right hand, but the left hand has no information about what to do. The left hand might as well be, you might as well be blind, because one eye can't see anything, one eye can. So, they find that the right hand, in the vast majority of people, is able to write. The left hand cannot. Because even though, if you ask a person with a functioning corpus callosum, of the connection between the brain, oh, well, you're right-handed, but, write your name with your left hand. It might take a lot of trial and error, and it might take a while, but they can do it. For these patients, they couldn't do it. It wasn't the case of, oh, this is difficult. It was impossible for them to do it. And so they had more experiments. If they were looking with their right eye or their right hand, they could read. They could, they could read, and then they could speak what they were seeing. So, oh, this says cat and dog. However, if you looked with the left eye could read what it was, and they could point to what it was. So if it's the word cat, they could point to the word cat, but they could not write the word cat.
Interesting.
And there were many of these things that they found. One side of the brain was specialized to be able to do it. And for people with a functioning corpus callosum, people made a much bigger deal out of these experiments than that was actually warranted. There were many books and papers and all of this for many years that said, oh, well, you're a left brain person, and that must mean that you are only good at being an accountant, or whatever. There was Oh my, that's a Gigantamax bunny boy. For those of you listening in the distant future when Pokemon no longer exists, I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun looking that up on the Galactic Encyclopedia. But anyway.
Pokemon will still exist. Please, it's game free.
God, no, nothing lasts forever.
It will wind up in the public domain.
Oh God, I hope so. That would be great. So why do I bring this up in relation to us? The reason why is because I think that there is at least a possibility that these factors of left brain, right brain, etc., I think that there is a possibility that these are heavily an influence on autism and ADHD. Because if the experiments showed pretty conclusively, and again, this is based on people with a medical condition, so you have to take that into account, that sometimes people with a medical condition, they may all have one trait and everybody else doesn't, but this has been confirmed by a lot of different lines of evidence now as well. So, writing center of the brain, right hand. That's why most people are right-handed, probably.
Yeah.
Drawing and creative side of the brain, the left hand. This is one reason why a lot of artists are probably one of the reasons why a lot of artists are left-handed, myself included. I'm such a special boy.
And then we have people that are ambidextrous.
Yes, ambidextrous, where they can use either one. So it is in a person with a functioning brain. I know that probably sounds like a joke, but it's not. Literally in a person with a functioning literal brain, it doesn't really matter that much that the brain has these specialized areas, because the brain can communicate very quickly with itself over the corpus callosum. But that being said, despite the fact that it's not the world's most important piece of information like some people have claimed it to be, there is still specialization on one side and the other side of the brain in most people. But here's the thing that I find interesting that I want you to pay attention to. If you could pause your game for about 60 seconds, my love. Okay? So, right side of the brain, right hand goes to the left side of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Logical, thinking, analytical, words. Left side, more artistic, more creative, thinking more in pictures rather than words. This is the more emotional side of the brain, so to speak. Again, a lot of this stuff is not nearly as cut and dry as people made it seem in the 80s and 90s when a lot of people like me were going to school. But here's my hypothesis that I would like to know if it's true or not. Here's my hypothesis. I think that it is at least possible that autism is an overactivity of the logical side of the brain. So logical side, right hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it is possible that ADHD and dyslexia are overactivity of the right side of the brain to the left hand, right side of the brain. Because those are the specializations that we know exist in the brain. So if I'm all about numbers and words, which people can speak to me for 5 seconds and figure that out about me. And if you are more about how does it feel? How do I use this creatively? Whereas I'm like, budget, numbers, bar graphs. I love bar graphs.
I personally prefer pie graphs.
I'm sure you
because
do.
pie graphs are very pretty.
You just like them because it's talking about food. We all know that to be true.
But
I'm just teasing you, my love.
But if you're spending 50% on...
If you're spending 50% of your money on pie, you should probably get a gym graph instead of a pie graph.
What? No, if you have a pie graph, you start with 100%, and then you take out individual slices, and all those slices have percentages to them.
Yes, yeah, darling, you don't have to.
Eloquent.
You don't have to explain to me what a pie graph.
I don't have to explain to you, but I can explain.
Oh, you're explaining it to the listeners. Okay,
I can explain to the listeners.
Sorry. I for a moment I thought you were trying to explain to me what a pie graph is. So, I got that one. I got it. I know what that one means. So. To finish off the discussion about the split brain patients, here is one of the most interesting things that in my opinion, this is one of the most interesting things to come out of scientific research in the past 100 years. Okay? This is, in my opinion, one of the strongest pieces of evidence for evolutionary theory and atheism. Now, I am not an atheist because, one, people do not like the term atheism, but two, I think that supernatural things could exist, but I'm looking for evidence for it. I find these types of things fascinating. If you told someone who was an atheist in 1910, oh, well, someone is going to discover this theory that means that, people can travel millions of units of distance called light years, because, of course, the light year had not been invented by that point, but they can travel these distances within a human lifetime. They would say, oh, well, that's magic. That has to be magic. There's no way that could happen within Newton's laws. It's impossible. But we know that that's not impossible. Anyway, I call myself a secular Buddhist Scientologist. I know that is much more complicated than most people even care to understand, but I am not an atheist. I want people to understand that about me because I changed my mind on that. If you go back and watch some of my older videos, I say things like, oh, well, I'm an atheist, and that is no longer true. And I would prefer for people to not derail my political campaign before it even gets started by going, oh, he's an atheist, he worships Satan. And I'm like, well, no, that's my husband. He worships Satan. But I do not.
Well, this is the American House of Chiefs. This is your Lord and Savior Satan. How can I help you today?
Exactly.
I don't worship Satan.
Oh, you don't?
No, I worship change. It'd be like saying I worship Odin.
Worship change? What do you mean?
I worship the fact that change is the way forward for society.
Yes. So wait, are you saying that you have made a religion out of evolutionary biology? Because if so, that would be incredible. And I would love to announce it on this podcast.
Yes.
Okay, well, we will call you the very first Darwinist as a religious term and not a scientific term. How interesting. Thank you. So you're creating a religion. I am not founding the religion of Scientology, but I would like to make it a lot more popular than it is right now. It is absurd how few people know about it or understand it. But anyway, so I'm helping out our founder L. Ron Hubbard to spread his religion, and you are founding your own. So delightful.
Yes.
Sounds like a plan. The very first Darwinist on this podcast. So, Mr. Darwinist, what would you like to say to your future congregants?
Oh, I would say, stay fluffy, stay furry.
Stay fluffy, stay furry.
And if someone tells you, no matter what status in life you are, if someone tries to tell you, you have to do something that way because it's unprofessional, tell them to go fluff themselves because it makes you happy.
Exactly. I wonder. I don't know exactly how I would quantify it, but I'm sure I could figure out a statistical basis for it. I wonder how many people have led unhappy lives because I have to do it this way. I have to. It's impossible to do it any other way.
No, it's not.
Have you heard of electrification? Electrification was a process that happened within our grandparents' lifetimes, which means getting electricity to all of the rural areas in America and throughout other places in the world. But when we talk about electrification, oftentimes we are, in the United States at least, we are referring to the U.S. process of electrification. And they said, oh, it's impossible. It can't be done. There's no way we could possibly have electric power out in the middle of Kentucky. Mitch McConnell will never be important because he's only 4 years old in this example.
And to those people, I would say, 1, you're wrong. 2, Jeff Bezos is a thing. Elon Musk is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
If those two immature fuckers...
Wow, hot take.
If those two immature fuckers can make billions of dollars, there's no reason why we can't bring electricity to Kentucky.
Well, see, the thing is that this argument was being made in, 1920, 1930. So
yeah.
This would have been long before Bezos. But you could say the same thing about John D. Rockefeller at the time. If Rockefeller can do it, so can you!
Rockefeller had the right idea.
Rockefeller had some good ideas other than the anti-Semitism.
I mean, Rockefeller's concept of taking over industries single-handedly and then creating his own empire.
It was such a good idea that we spent the next 100 years trying to destroy the
idea of monopoly.
The monopoly laws that prevented people like Rockefeller from doing the things he did.
Not very successfully.
I know.
Let's see. Well, the Disney Corporation. What don't they own?
Good question. This is actually an excellent question because I will definitely use the power of eminent domain to take Disney shares when I am the president because there's no reason not to. But I don't have my computer cord. I'll use this phone to look it up. What does Disney own? Excellent question. They own a lot.
Might be easier just to go down the list of things they don't own.
Yes. What does Disney own? There we go. Okay. Whoops. Okay, this is my personal favorite graph of it because it's become so complicated that it requires a graph that is it doesn't say this size.
Is that just
how do I download the
Is that just the blueprints for the Death Star?
Yes, correct. I'm glad that you figured it out.
What the hell is this thing?
Okay. So once this downloads, I can see how big the image is because I just want to tell you how many pixels it is. If I can. Oh yes, it's 2,500 by 3,000 pixels to be able to see all of the detail of what they own. That's a bit absurd, don't you think? So let's see. So they've separated it into the Mickey Mouse ears, which is quite funny. Walt Disney Company is the middle. Obviously, they own the most. Then you have Marvel on the left. Then you have 21st Century Fox on the right.
Got it.
Because they recently acquired 21st Century Fox. So, where would you like to start? Marvel, 21st Century Fox, or Walt Disney Company?
Walt Disney Company.
Because obviously it would take us quite a few hour-long podcasts to get through this entire thing. But let's just zoom in on one tiny part of the graph. And I'll make sure to link this in our show notes as well. But I'll just zoom in on one tiny part of the graph. And we can see how much they own. So, Walt Disney Company, you have Disney Music Group, Disney Studios, Disney Parks, Direct to Consumer, ESPN, Steamboat Ventures, Disney ABC Television, Disney Theatrical. Which one do you want to take a look at?
And how are they not a monopoly?
They are, under the laws that are currently in effect. The laws have not changed, but the regulations around the laws have changed due to lobbying.
Thank you, lobbyist firms.
Lobbyists, you can go die in fire. But yes. So, choose one. Choose.
Puppy head hurts just thinking about this.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Disney is a $30 billion a year company, or it was recently. I think it may have gone up since then because it surged dramatically during the pandemic. How convenient that Disney, a company that primarily operates theme parks, would have greatly increased its holdings during the pandemic. But that being said, let's just zoom in on just one of the things that they own. Out of, I would guess, maybe about 24 on this map. So, we have Disney ABC Television, okay? So, here is everything that Disney owns within their television division. ABC Entertainment, ABC Digital, ABC Studios, Times Square Studios, ABC Family Worldwide, ABC-owned television stations, including WLS-7 Chicago, KFSN-30 Fresno, KTRK-13 Houston, and many more local television stations. American Broadcasting Company, ABC, American Broadcasting Companies Incorporated, Disney/ABC Television Group Digital Media, ABC News, A&E Networks, including A&E Crime and Investigation and FYI, A&E International, including A&E Network UK, Germany, Asia, Latin America, Italy, India, TV18, and FYI TV18. History Network, including History, History 2, History in Espanol, and Military History Channel. Lifetime Entertainment Services, including Lifetime Channel, Lifetime Movies Channel, Lifetime Real Women Channel, Lifetime Movie Club Channel, Lifetime Radio for Women, not channel, radio station, Lifetime Press, and Lifetime Digital. Vice Media International and Viceland, A&E Indie Films, A&E Networks and Consumer Products, A&E Studies, A&E Films, A&E Networks Digital, Disney Channels Worldwide, including Disney Junior, Disney XD, Disney Channel Radio, Disney KRDC, AM Radio, It's a Laugh Productions, Broadcast Satellite Disney Company Limited, and our personal favorite, and the one that creates all the furries, Disney Television Animation. Now that, I remind you, that was only one of approximately 24 different areas of the company on this chart. And I didn't even read every single thing in that one area. That is how absurd this monopoly has become. That is not okay. They have something like, I don't remember, it's like 30 or 40 or 50% of the whole TV, animation, and movie industry.
Are they planning on building a Death Star?
Well, yes, obviously. Darling, do you...
Why?
Okay, do you know about the Star Wars Hotel? Because I showed it to you, remember?
Yes.
Darling, they built a space station hotel.
Yes.
They built a space station that is staffed by people in military uniforms that is overtaken by the evil empire. That's part of the story, is a violent overthrow by an evil empire. And they did this for giggles. Oh, it's so much fun. Look, why don't you come on our galactic cruise ship and get boarded by a hostile force? Sounds like fun. I'm in.
Can we join the Empire at the least?
I wish. Oh, yes, you can. So,
Okay.
someday I would like to take you to the Star Wars Hotel because it looks delightful. I honestly think that it is a work of mastery by the Imagineers, but it is hilariously out of tune with Disney's whole corporate message of, oh, we're just a happy little company founded by Walt Disney. We're just a happy place where you can spend all your money. That is not the message that comes across when you walk into a military battleship, military station on the ship that has been designed by Disney in the model of other military ships in real life. That's a little bit terrifying. Yes, let's make... Now, I obviously do not think that Disney is planning to create an army and take over the world, but the fact that they could, and they could use the design for the military turrets on the outside of a spaceship that they are now training people in their expensive Star Wars hotel. They are now training people on how to use military turrets on the outside of spaceships in a life-size cockpit.
I'm Mickey Mouse.
I'm Mickey Mouse. Join my Space Force today. Hello, children. Have you ever wanted to blow up commies from space? Let's blow up all the commies.
One second. There, Goofy. I'm Mickey Mouse. I'm gonna take over the world, and there ain't no way gonna stop me.
It'll be a goofy old time.
I think you're more of a Donald Duck. Fine. And that man's
I may be a voice actor. It's so difficult to tell.
I'm Mickey Mouse.
You can actually do a half-decent Mickey. It's actually kind of impressive. So, there's one more piece to the the split brain story that I wanted to tell you before we got too far off track. There's one and only one more piece to the story that I want to tell you. So, what they found, and you know, logically this has to be true, but it was a surprise, of course, when they found it, was that the two halves of the brain made independent decisions. So, for example, let's say that you showed the person a menu.
Yep.
And the menu has, 30 different sandwiches or whatever. The left brain might decide on one sandwich, and the right brain decide on a completely different sandwich. And then, here was the best part. Okay? So, you have one side of the brain that's verbal, and one side of the brain that's nonverbal. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if you had the nonverbal side pick a specific option, so I'm gonna have the ham and Swiss, is what the nonverbal side pointed to the picture or whatever. Then the verbal side of the brain would come up with a justification of why it picked that decision, and we can see this in every debate or every, political party that's ever existed, but, justifying things after the fact. There's actually a very strong evolutionary basis, a research basis of how this happens. Oh, you give people a hard decision, they make a decision, but then they justify the decision regardless of whether it was right or wrong. And to finish out our story about these split brain patients, there was at least one case at least one case where the person, when asked, one side of the brain said that it believed in God and was a Christian, and the other side said it did not. So, the question that has been making priests and rabbis and ayatollahs and whoever shake in their prissy little boots for the past 50 years now is, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we are not taking, some type of theological argument into account. So we're not taking, oh, well, he had to make sure he wasn't a sinner, or he couldn't eat raw meat, or whatever.
You couldn't eat raw meat. Well, no, unless you hang out with wolves, you probably shouldn't eat raw meat.
No, I know. I'm giving an example of like a dietary restriction. So we're taking all of these things out of the equation for the sake of the thought experiment. So this person, whoever they were, because their identity was never released as far as I know.
It's in a secret archive somewhere.
I'm sure.
Maybe we'll just
hold on. Let me finish the story.
Okay.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that in whatever religion that they practiced, that this person did everything right. Okay? So they maybe they're a Jewish person and they've been circumcised and they never eat pork. Or they're a Christian person and they have, said the prayer of salvation, or a Protestant Christian person. They've said the prayer of salvation, they've tithed, they've done good deeds, etc. But they die and go to heaven. And one half of their mind does not believe in Christ, or believes in a completely different religion. Maybe it believes in Satan or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, this person, do they go to heaven or hell? And to my knowledge, because I've looked into this very thoroughly, I find it absolutely fascinating. To my knowledge, there has not been a single religious person of any religion able to give an answer that is satisfactory to me, at the very least, and to Reddit / the atheist community at large in general. Now, obviously, Reddit does not represent the atheist community at large, but they are by far the largest group of atheists on the internet. So, while I vehemently disagree with a lot of the things that Reddit atheists have done, the fact that they are the largest group on the internet is there's not even any contest. It's the largest by far. So, the only thing that I have heard in response to this argument so far is arguments based on personal belief. Because, to be fair, in most religions, that's all you can do. You can't say, oh, well, of course, the half of his brain that was religious went to heaven, and the other half went to hell. Like, no, that you can't split a soul. That in almost every religious tradition, that is impossible. Obviously, human religions are very complicated, so there are some religions where the soul can be split, but they are not any of the more popular religions. So, I would like to, now that you have heard all of my story behind this, I would like to hear your argument. If there is life after death, and if one half of the brain believes and one half does not, and they did everything else right, would the brain go to heaven or hell? Would the soul go to heaven or hell, I should say? And ever since this question was posed, theological scholars have been making exactly the same face that you just did of, because from what I have heard, there is no definitive answer. Obviously, some people are going to give you a definitive answer, but if you press them on it, as I have done many times, they go, well, that's just my opinion. You say, oh, well, somebody might say, oh, well, if they've said the prayer of salvation before the mind was cut in half, then they go to heaven. But if the prayer of salvation was said after it was cut in half, then half of the brain did not say the prayer of salvation, and therefore they would have to be judged based on their actions, similar to a person who has never heard the gospel of Christ. And you get into these very strange and very, in my opinion, pedantic arguments like that, of like, well, when did they say the prayer of salvation? When exactly? Was it on the day of the surgery? Was it right before they went under anesthesia? Like, it just becomes absurd.
Well, because they're looking at the wrong aspect of it.
Okay. What aspect would you look at?
They're arguing, oh, the human soul goes to heaven or hell, and that's the only explanation there is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say their argument doesn't matter.
Okay.
Because heaven, the afterlife, is a fucking school ground. It is just a
school ground.
Yeah, the afterlife is just a place to take a final exam.
Okay, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, we come to Earth, you learn your lessons, you die,
okay,
you get tested on the lessons that you were there for.
Interesting. Okay, so kind of a reincarnation concept.
Basically.
Okay, interesting. So
it doesn't matter. In my own humble opinion, it doesn't matter if you're atheist, Hindu, whatever, as long as you're not blowing yourself up for some weird god.
Right.
You don't need to. Chill.
Just chillax, bro.
If you want to blow
bro, I will make you the most delicious pork kielbasa that you have ever tasted. Since you've never tasted a kielbasa before, it will be the most delicious. And I will tell you that it is a beef kielbasa, so you will actually eat it. And then when you do eat it, you will say, that was so good. I would love to have another. And I would say, well, from this pig? And they go, oh, well, you tricked me. Fuck you.
Yeah, but still, guys, just chill.
Yes! Oh my god, if people would only just chill a little bit, the world would be so much better. By the way, I've come up with the name of the strain of hemp, and for legal reasons I'm going to say the word hemp and not any other word. But legal hemp. The strain of legal hemp that we're going to grow.
Yes. Are we going to call it the Wiggly Puppy?
No, we are going to call it, because here's how we're going to market it, okay?
Yep.
I will be my scientist character for the show. And I will say, maybe we'll like sponsor other people's videos, for example, to get the word out about it. And it'll be like, friends, I've discovered the most powerful chemical in the universe. It's a new chemical element. It's called chilaxium. Come to my internet website and order your chilaxium today. And it's legal CBD, basically. Maybe a little bit of Delta 8 if the federal government keeps their panties on about that. But CBD is legal in all 50 states, as far as I know. But as long as it's legal in that state, we can sell it. And
we'll just decriminalize every single drug ever.
Yes, it should be decriminalized. It is absurd. It is absurd that in an age with as much science and reason as we have, that we are still treating the issues of addiction and poverty and crime with the same techniques that have not worked for 150 years.
But we gotta protect the promulists, so we gotta put these people in prison because they're committing crime.
See. But You have to consider the actual effect on the population. You can't just say, oh, well, prison is the only way. The only way that we could protect ourselves is by putting people in prison. And it's like, are you stupid? Because
the Nazis tried that. It was called the Holocaust.
Or when we put a bunch of people with darker colored skin from Africa, ancestors from Africa in the case of the modern day, or from Africa itself in the case of the old times. But when we put a bunch of people in work camps where they were not allowed to leave, and then paid them nothing for their work, that's called slavery. And it was outlawed in 1870 or some shit. The Constitution says that you are not allowed to have slaves in the United States. And what is prison labor for 12 cents an hour other than slavery? Especially because something like, I don't even remember, it's like 50% of the prison population is African American. And that means, to be fair, there are only, from what I understand, about 10% of the population that is African American. And so having 50% of your prison population be a minority group that's only 10% means that, just based on that rough math, I should look up the exact numbers, but based on that rough math, that's 5 times as many people from that racial group as should be, quote unquote, should be in prison if it was a fair system. And so it's not a fair system by the numbers. It's so obvious that you do not have to be a statistician to look at these things and say that is completely unfair.
Agreed.
Well, we are getting close to about an hour and a half for this episode, or hour and 15 minutes, something like that, for this episode. So I think that we have covered a lot of really interesting topics. And just to finish my argument, quote unquote, about the split brain patients, it is unfortunate for the cause of scientific research that these procedures are no longer necessary just because they yielded such interesting results. But just for the sake of suffering of patients, etc., I mean, obviously we are glad that we have things like psychogenic medicines instead of having to cut people's brains in half. But I think it would be fascinating if it were possible to do it in an ethical way. I think it would be fascinating to perform similar experiments with people who have autism and ADHD and to find out. For example, we have much more advanced brain scanning technology now, so you don't have to cut someone's brain open to be able to experiment with their brain. You can, show the same stimuli with, the same image or same video. You can show the same stimuli to a person with autism and a person with ADHD, and you can see what parts of the brain light up. And that is a much more humane way to do these types of experiments. So, if these types of experiments could be performed in a safe, humane, and ethical way, I would be fascinated to see just how different the brains of your control group, quote unquote, your average patient, versus the brain of an autistic person versus the brain of an ADHD or dyslexic person. And I'm sure those studies are being done. It's just it's a complicated field of study.
A little bit.
That should finish us up for the episode for today. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. We are so grateful for your support. We have a ton of episodes now on the feed, and if you can, please give those a listen, including many of the episodes that we made a few months ago. Those are all, in my opinion, great to listen to. Especially, I've been hearing a lot of listeners writing in and saying that they're, just queuing it up and listening to all of them in a row, and that is frickin' awesome.
Thank you, listeners.
Yes.
It only makes sense when you start from the beginning.
That's true. For those of you, who may have scrolled back a year or two from now or 1,000 years from now, for those of you scrolling back and like, oh, I'm going to listen to some of the early episodes. Well,
good luck to you.
I would recommend starting from the very beginning, because there's a lot of context that you will miss if you do not start from the very beginning. So yes, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on the Star Wars HoloNet at Disneyland's, Disney World's Star Wars Hotel, make sure that you like the video and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And please do write a review and a comment wherever you see this on whatever podcasting app that you're using. We greatly appreciate your sticking with us and helping us on this amazing journey that we're on.
Spaceship Earth,
as Epcot would put it. So, thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.